Thank you all very much for making time to come this morning. I've never done this before, so I don't know what the protocol is. Yes, I'm not quite sure what the protocol is, but I want to just thank you all for coming. My name is Andre van Zyl. I am the director of the Academic Development Center here at UJ. And for the moment, I'm also the director of the National Resource Center, South African National Resource Center for the first year experience and students in transition. I know that's quite a mouthful, but that is the name that we've got for the center. We have two guests with us as well. Both of them are from the United States. On my left is Jennifer Koip. She is the director of the National Resource Center for the First Year Experience and Students in Transition in the United States. They have existed for 25 years.
Longer than that, yes.
And the First Year Experience is a very prominent movement in the United States, and our South African National Resource Center is very lucky to be associated with the National Resource Center and to be able to work with them. She's also one of our keynote speakers at the conference that's taking place starting today, but really starting tomorrow. To my right, we've got Dallin George Young. I want to get his title right. He's the Assistant Director for Research, Grants and Assessment, also at the National Resource Center. And the National Resource Center is located at the University of South Carolina. As the South African National Resource Center is being established on one of UJ's campuses. As you'll see to the back, it's got its own visual identity. We are very kindly hosted by UJ, but it is not a UJ entity in the normal sense of the word. It is actually a national resource center trying to serve the nation as a whole. I'll say a few more things about the National Resource Center at the end. We did send a few questions along that we would address at this session, so Jennifer and I will address most of the questions in quite a short fashion, and then we'll give you a chance for some questions and interaction after that. Okay, so I think we need to start off by just talking a little bit about the gravity of the problem of student success, specifically first year student success and first year student transition. So I would like Jennifer to just give us a bit of an international perspective on that for a start, please.
Certainly. Thank you, Andre. We were very pleased to be partnering with the National Resource Center here in South Africa, and it's a very logical next step. The movement in the United States around the first year experience and students in transition and the student success initiatives underneath that has been around, as Andre indicated, for close to 3 decades. So this represents an ongoing commitment in the United States to the notion of student access, learning, development, retention, success. We've been really pleased in the United States at the National Resource Center to also be able to provide collaborative leadership, support, and other partnerships to other movements in other countries, and to also be a connective node in the international community around first year experience. We've been pleased to work with colleagues in Europe, in the European first year experience movement, Australasia, and the Pacific Rim, obviously in South Africa. We've also begun some work in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. So this really is a national phenomenon, and the scope of the first year experience and students in transition movement really crosses many cultures, countries, higher education contexts and systems. So we're really pleased to see this international attention to this and a growing momentum around the first year experience movement to address many of the challenges that students are facing as they matriculate into higher education and hopefully go through their process of learning, dedicating themselves to a discipline, and then matriculating out of the university successfully with a degree into the world of work to go on to be social, civic, economic, familial leaders, to really create the next generation of educated citizens who will give back to the communities. So this has been a really wonderful opportunity to continue to strengthen and codify and formalize the movements around a national resource center like we have here in the United States and also in South Africa to be able to lead that movement on a national and international scale.
Thank you, Jennifer. In the press release, we referred to the state of South African student success, and that's not research that was done by me. This is a document that is available in the public domain. It's called the Proposal for Undergraduate Curriculum Reform in South Africa. It was published by the CHE. It was published in 2013, and I've got PDF. If you're interested in it, I would gladly send it. If you could just remind me to send it to you. But this also contained, although it's a proposal for undergraduate curriculum reform, it also contained a cohort study, only the second one that we've done, following all the students through the system for 5 years, for mostly 3-year qualifications, but also some 4-year qualifications. And all the students in the system were tracked for 5 years, and the results are contained in this. To summarize very shortly, if you haven't seen this yet, when they tracked the students excluding UNISA through the system for 5 years, they found that approximately 35% of them graduated in good time, in other words, 3 years for a 3-year qualification and 4 years for a 4-year qualification. But when they continued tracking them, by the end of 5 years, about 41% of the ones who entered had dropped out. And there was then still a few in the system, but they expected not much more than about 53-54% to ever graduate. Now, that is not too dissimilar from the situation in the United States, where they also struggle with dropout. But the difference in South Africa is that we are working with the top 18%. We've got space in the higher education sector for approximately 18% of matrics. Then the system is full. That we call our participation rate. The plan is to push that up to about 25% over time, but at the moment it's on about 18%. Now that means of the top 18% of South African young people who enter higher education, and we have to presume that they were the ones who did best in grade 12, because otherwise the universities would not have taken them, right? Of those, approximately just under half will never graduate. Okay, and if we then focus that a little bit more and we look at the first year, we find that of those that will drop out, of that almost half that will drop out, more than half of that half, if that makes sense, okay, 50 to 60% of that half that will drop out during their first year of study. Okay, we've lost them by the end of their first year. And that's why the focus on the first year is so important. If they don't make that hurdle, in the South African context, most of them will not come back to the system. They will leave the system and they will not attain a higher education qualification. So that's the gravity of the problem, and I think as a system we are all aware of it and we take it very seriously, and you will find that a lot of good work is going on throughout the system. I think part of what we have to ask ourselves is, who is to blame for this? Whose fault is this? You know? And it's very popular in South Africa, I think in many spheres, but it's also true in the higher education sphere, to try and give very simple answers to complex problems. Because people want to say it's only that, you know. So there has been people blaming the school system. There has been people blaming the universities. There have been people blaming a variety of things. It's the students who have to take more responsibility. But I think the fact of the matter is, in higher education, society and the higher education sector and the students meet each other. It's a nexus. And universities don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in a society to serve that society. And although we could obviously say that there are things that are problematic in the schools, and I think there are, the fact is that these are the schools we are serving as higher education institutions. We have to work with the students we're getting. There aren't any other students out there, and we need to teach the ones we're actually getting. And I think for us to take that seriously is really important. Now, for a long time, something that I would typify as academic Darwinism used to be the approach in higher education. Okay? Now, what is academic Darwinism? By that I would mean survival of the fittest. If you're good enough, you make it, and if you drop out, it's basically a form of natural selection. You clearly just weren't good enough. And I think in the South African context, that's an untenable situation. We can't have 18% of our young people entering the system, half of them never graduate, and take that approach. And I think it's an approach that's becoming more and more rare within the system. There are still people who would take that up, but not universities who would take that up as a position or support that position. We definitely don't. But then the question arises, what can we do? And I think part of the important step that has been taken in higher education in South Africa, and the National Resource Centre I will tell you about is one of those steps, is to take responsibility for the things we can actually change. There are certain things we can do as a system to also be more open, so that more students have a more realistic chance of success. Now, the reasons why people drop out are as complex as the number of people who drop out. Each individual will have their own set of reasons, but there are broad sets of reasons we can identify and we can try and address and try and solve the problem by addressing those issues from the university side. At the moment, I think the articulation, that meeting, that nexus between the higher education sector and the school system has been broken to some extent. You know, I think we're sitting at a distance from each other. And there has been talk in this document, they speak of the articulation gap, which I think is a very good description of that. There is an articulation gap between the school system and higher education. And yes, both sides have a role to play, but I think higher education is progressively taking this serious and taking their responsibility very seriously to try and address this. And obviously what we cannot do is in any way, shape or form make anything easier that we do. We're supposed to be difficult. Higher education is difficult and it will stay difficult and it's supposed to be. So the things we can look at is understanding that transition better, understanding the social, personal, academic aspects of it better, so that we can create an environment within which students have a reasonable chance of success. All students have a reasonable chance of success when they enter the system. And a lot of wonderful work has been done throughout the country. I just want to state that very clearly as well. If you go to all the different universities, you will find pockets of excellence. But it has been anecdotal to some extent, and it's also not been systemic at all. And I think a problem the size of this, as is being proposed here with the flexible curriculum, that is a proposal that is on the table. It's not something that has been accepted yet. We need systemic solutions to be part of what happens with what happens at universities themselves. And for us to do that, we need to really understand the problem better than we are understanding it at the moment. And for that, we need research. For a long time, I think we worked too much on gut feel and not enough based on solid systemic research on these issues. And that link between research and practice, I think, is crucial. As academics, we're really good at addressing problems. You give us a problem and we'll study it for a few years, and yes, it'll be cerebral and cold to some extent, but we'll come up with solutions for you if you give us a bit of time. And I think what we want here is to focus that academic gaze much more closely and clearly on this issue of first-year transitions into higher education. Not to come up with theories and ethereal stuff that hangs in the air, but to really address it in a much more holistic, but also an academically sound way. And I think there I would like Jennifer maybe to just say a few things, and then maybe, Jennifer, I'm going to ask you to say a few things, then I want to just say something about the National Resource Centre, because I haven't actually said much about that.
Certainly.
So could you say a little bit about your personal, but the National Resource Centre in the States approach to this nexus between research and practice?
Certainly, and I think in some ways it's going to maybe foreshadow some of the things you're going to be saying about the center. One of the things that I think is really exciting to me about the South African National Resource Center is this prioritization of research, because it is not only a commitment to advancing the scholarly agenda on these important topics of student learning success, matriculation, policy around student success, but it is also a very strong commitment to practice and influencing what actually happens to students in higher education and even in the schools. Because truth be told, the mutuality of research and practice in a field like higher education, particularly with first-year experience, we're an applied field, we don't have the luxury of bifurcating those two. Best practice is only defined as best practice when it has been proven in the research. So conducting a research agenda, a strong research agenda of the scope that the National Resource Center does in the United States and the South African National Resource Center does, is really a commitment to being able to influence and enhance practices that are going to affect student success, as well as advancing a scholarly agenda that has interdisciplinary impact. So that is really promising. The National Resource Center in the United States actually holds as one of its core commitments the connection between research and practice, such that we advance the notion of applied research and scholarly practice. And I think through some of our success with that and our collaboration with Andre and the other colleagues here at the University of Johannesburg, that has become one of the stated commitments and values of the South African National Resource Center. So the notion really, you can't unpack those two, and it's exciting to see that research is a major priority because it will affect so many different angles of this issue in South Africa as it has in the United States and continues to do so. Plus, we at the center and I have the firm belief that true innovation is happening in the liminal space between research and practice. When you're able to connect those two and get a lot of different voices in the research process, as well as a scholarly angle to a practical approach, that's when real innovation is happening. It's engaging multiple voices, it's inclusive, it's collaborative, and that's really where the greatest work is coming out of. So that's really hopeful as well, to see that intersection of research and practice. And on a personal level, I want to thank you for inviting me. That's actually, you invited me to come speak. So the opening keynote address at the conference of the first year experience is the notion of what is the connection between research and practice towards the advancement of the first year experience.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. So just the last few words from my side, and then we can open the floor for any questions that you might have. So what happened is about a year ago, we applied for discretional funding from the Department of Higher Education and Training. They took a part of what's called the Teaching Development Grant and they cut it off and they made it available so that we could apply for money. And we applied for money with 5 other institutions. The University of Joburg initiated it and we had the support of 5 others. And we applied for money to establish this South African National Resource Center for the first year experience and students in transition. It was approved and we were very kindly funded by the Department of Higher Education for the next 3 years to establish this center. And that entails that we are in process of appointing 4 people, 2 researchers, an administrator and a director who will be running the center. The center will be located and we'll invite you for that as well. When the venues are ready on the Bunting Road campus, the venues are being prepared for the center. And we'll invite you to the opening of that. But the center will exist there on the Bunting Road campus, and it will serve the South African higher education community. I can tell you that we now have a conference that is starting today with some pre-conference activity, and we have 160 people attending that conference from all over the country. Nothing international at the moment. We only have South African participants, but I can tell you that all universities in the country that I've spoken to are in support of this National Resource Center. And what we will be doing as a National Resource Center is we will be doing the research. We will be taking existing research and compiling that and making it more readily and easily available to people who are working with first-year students. We will also work very closely with the National Resource Center in the States to make some of their resources available, but also as we have done up to this point, to do some research with them. We've, for example, worked with Dallin on a research project already. And the idea here is to provide resources to the whole country, because we're not in competition when it comes to first-year success. We're all trying to achieve the same thing, getting our first-year students to make that transition successfully and to move forward into the higher education system and into our economy. There's a lot more that I could say, but I think we've said enough. I would rather give you a chance to ask us some questions, if you have any. Yes, shall we start with yours?
Yes, I'm Norma from SABC Radio News. I have 3 short questions.
Sure.
If you can give us numbers of how many students were tracked across the 5-year period. The second one, how many universities formed part of your research? And the last one, what were the main reasons for students dropping out? If you can maybe outline this, because I think in the South African context, that's very important for people to know what are the issues that are affecting the students.
I can't off the top of my head tell you what the cohort size was. What I can tell you is this study is looking at all the universities in the country except one, which I'm not sure which one. They didn't tell us which one didn't participate, but literally all the other universities took part. But I think you might have missed right in the beginning, but this is research that was done by the Council on Higher Education. That's what the press statement refers to. This was out there since 2013, and I'll gladly send you the PDF. Then you can look at all the details that are in there. So I'm not going to be able to answer that first question. Just give me the second one again. I remember the third one, but I've forgotten your second one.
How many students were tracked?
Okay, so that I can't tell you, the actual numbers. Okay, but it's a cohort study of all first years entering in the year 2006 and 2007. It's for those 2 years that were tracked. What are the main reasons? I think there are as many reasons as there are students dropping out. But you could possibly categorize those reasons into things like academic reasons, which would entail a variety of different aspects, social reasons, where people struggle to feel at home as if they fit in, but then also things of personal logistics like housing, finance, even things like food. You know, there I can speak about my own university much more than I can speak nationally, but it's been a shock to us to find out how many of our students don't have enough food to eat. So all of those factors play a role, and I would categorize some of them as, I want to be careful because the term is quite loaded, but I would categorize some of those as almost life problems and others really academic and academically related problems that play a role. I don't know if either of you wanted to add anything to that last part of it. No?
I think that you hit upon the ones, certainly under having a community, students being able to have a community and support system, being able to feel empowered within the organization to do their best work, an understanding and intentionality around a commitment to a discipline, a course of study that is meaningful to them, that bodes well for their success. So some intentionality, I think, on a student's part also is often a very good resource to overcome some of the logistical, personal, and academic challenges. You know, a student that is motivated, directed, and is very intentional and is empowered to find the services they need within a university and has advocates can often use those as a resiliency tools to overcome some of the other challenges that are very real. So I think that we also have to look at what the student brings and also what we're facilitating in the student in terms of their resiliency and empowerment to take their skill set, take their talents, and to face challenges that are either they come in with or that they're going to have during those 4 years in their academic and personal development toward the overarching goal of success. Not just getting a degree, but also being able to have a skill set that will make them employable and engage them in the larger community.
I also think there's, when first-year students come to a university it's engaging in a new culture and a totally new environment. There's a lot of bureaucracy that they've never had to deal with before. So helping those first-year students navigate all of those complex challenges is something that's, kind of what Rondri's calling life problems, because you're going to face those problems throughout the rest of your life. But, probably in the schools and before that, there was somebody else who was taking care of that for them. And so this is the first time that they've had to learn how to navigate those systems on their own, and sometimes they get lost in the shuffle as they're trying to figure all of that out.
Thank you.
This touches on her question and on what you've already mentioned, Jennifer, but what I'm very interested is to know whether the reasons that students drop out in South Africa in their first year and the reasons that American students drop out in their first year. I'm just trying to see, is this a universal problem? Are there different aspects to it? Maybe you can both answer that.
Do you want to start?
I think that there are certain parallels. The basic things we've been talking about, the ability to express your talents, the ability to be empowered, to be able to have advocates and resources, to create a sense of community, to have direction in terms of personal direction and career direction that's related to your major or course of study. I think that those are, can be wonderful catalysts for success or huge stumbling blocks for challenge for students almost in any environment. There are certainly very real differences in culture, context, and I'm even thinking system. The system of higher education in the United States is very complex, and the different types of institutions and how they interact and matriculate. So we are, first-year students we're dealing with issues of dual enrollment, transfer. So there's a complexity to our system that introduces some different dynamics. But I think the fundamental issues are very similar. Certainly, I think that also here some of the challenges of students with respect to what Andre was talking about, life challenges of poverty, hunger, underpreparedness. I think that they're probably at a much larger scale here, but they are present, if not prevalent, in the United States. And I'm not saying that because higher education has necessarily in the United States dealt with those problems well. In some ways, I think that those problems have been in the domain of our elementary and secondary school systems, and those students don't ever make it. Students who are very poor, very underprepared, very low income, who are dealing with issues, very substantial social and personal familial issues, don't make it to higher education, which is a problem for us in terms of a pipeline issue and issues of access and service. But it may sound like I'm speaking around the problem, but I think fundamentally the formula for success has some commonalities across these different areas. But the lens through which we look at them and we address those issues is going to be different, and we're going to call upon different tools and resources given the different cultural issues, the different higher education systems, the different tools we have. So I think there's a little bit of both to that, similarity and difference.
I would agree with Jennifer. I would just expand a little bit on one of her points and just say, if you look at American society and you compare it to South African society, the differences in society will tell you something about the differences in challenge as well. The word poverty in South Africa has a different meaning than it has in the States. If you say a student is poor in the States, there are students who are really poor. But for South Africa, if we say a student is really poor, we all know as South Africans what that means. And that means really poor. So the depth of that problem goes to a different level than it would in most instances in the States. And I think the second thing is, in the United States, they have often been in the past called minority students, or non-traditional students. And I think if we think of South African higher education, we've reached equity in terms of access. So our systemic access to higher education system reflects our country's population makeup. But it also does so in demographically speaking. In other words, we are finding that we have so many poor, really poor people, and that means at a university like mine, for example, it's not the minorities that are in trouble in terms of not having the support financially, etc. It is the majority that has that problem. And that makes the problem bigger for us as universities. It makes it much more complex to address because you need a huge amount of resources and focus on that bigger group who need that assistance at a much deeper level. Okay, so I would say if you list them, they would be the same, but if you walk in practice, they would often look very different.
But in some ways, I think those differences make a collaboration like this one very exciting because there's a lot we can learn from each other.
Absolutely.
About areas where there's been great success here, where there might be some challenges in the States and vice versa. So that is the basis of what makes these kinds of collaborations great, is that we can support each other mutually in the areas where there are similarities, and we can similarly offer support and knowledge and the ability to facilitate learning in areas where we're different. So that's the basis to me of I know it's a different angle, but to me that's the really exciting part of this type of a collaboration.
I think we had a hand on the side. Yes.
Yeah. Regarding the proposal by the CHE to make undergraduate curriculum flexible, what's the talk amongst academics and within the National Resource Center? Are you hoping that Nzimande does adopt this recommendation?
Okay. I wouldn't even presume to speak for my own university on this issue. I would speak personally, and I can to some extent say some of what has happened. So this document went out for comment to the system, and the CHE compiled a document that has gone to the minister, which is largely positive about the proposal. So it seems as if the sector, broadly speaking, is supporting this as a concept. From a personal perspective, I have very little doubt that we need curricular space. If we want to reach the same outcome, the exit outcomes that we want to achieve at the moment, we are finding that we don't have enough curricular space. And this is a personal opinion. Some of my colleagues will not like it at all. But I do think we do need more curricular space to make sure that that transition can happen more effectively. I personally am in support of this. What the National Resource Centre's view will be, I think they'll be neutral, because this will be one of the structural elements of the system within which we work. And if we were asked for an opinion, we would definitely give that opinion. But we are not one of the direct stakeholders. We would be an indirect stakeholder in what happens here. If it stays 3 and 4 years as it is now, we'll support that and we'll work with that. We don't have time to wait for something. Look, even if this is approved tomorrow, it's going to take us, I would guess, 5 to 7 years to implement this. So for the foreseeable future, we have the system that we have. And it doesn't matter what Minister Nzimande decides. I think we'll keep that for now, at least. I hope that answers your question.
It does, but it sounds like then there is no agency to address the matter.
No, there is. Look, I think one must just be careful. If you change something as structural as this, our curriculum structure, I have been part of conversations within my own institution about the impact that that would make in terms of functioning as a university. So urgency, I mean, if you go and look at a place like Hong Kong, who've just moved from a 3 to a 4 year system, it took them years to implement that in a controlled way. Otherwise, they could possibly have messed up the whole system. So once the decision is made by the minister, I can tell you with all urgency we'll jump in, but you must realize it will be a recurriculation process. We're not going to take an extra year and slap it on at the bottom. What we would have to do is really recurriculate a program over 4 years and really think about how we do that. And that must be a thoughtful process, I would venture to say. You know? And I understand the urgency, but I think we need to find a balance between urgency and doing this right, because you will see such a systemic change if it were to happen once in your lifetime, and probably not for another few 100 years. So it's worthwhile getting it right, I would argue. Okay, but that is not up to me. So luckily I don't have to defend that position, but I think that is realistically the case. Anybody else?
You said something about, the word escapes me now, but like making first year flexible.
Yes.
How is this different from, because I know many universities have like development phases
Yes.
to sort of get you into. So how does this differ from what's already in
Okay. Once again, I would highly recommend that I send you this, because it makes the case much better than I'm going to be able to do now, and I wouldn't presume to speak for the authors of this report, but very short. Up to this point, you would enter a 3 or a 4 year qualification, and you would be put in an extended qualification, but that would almost be something that is stigmatized. Okay? Although most of those students would actually need more time, we would be stigmatizing the ones who would take more time. And the idea of this is to say, let's create a space where everybody enters on a 4-year program. Unless you can show us that you're ready to complete it in 3, then we will allow you to do that. So that would make what is fact already, if you look at these stats, it would just put that into the structure of the actual programs. It would take the fact that most people don't graduate in good time and just say the 35% can still graduate in 3 years if they want to, and it allows that possibility. But the ones who are graduating in a year extra does so in a controlled, planned, pedagogically sound fashion, not by accident, in inverted commas. Okay? Yes.
In his budget speech, Minister Mzimande said that the first year dropout rate went from 25% in 2005 to 2019 about
Okay.
it. Do you agree with those stats? Do you work with them?
I don't have access to the newest stats. I would trust the minister on that completely. The last stats that were given to me publicly were these stats that talk of the 2006 and 7 cohorts, and those were closer to 25%. Now, we have been taking this really seriously for the past decade at least as universities. So I would be very happy if we have taken it down to 19%, which would still be too high, I would say. That's still a fifth of people we're losing. But I would completely take the minister. He would have access to all the immediate data, and they would be tracking. We are now tracking these students much more effectively than we've ever done. So I would say that's wonderful news. And
So would you agree that there's an improvement?
I would definitely agree. I mean, I only have anecdotal experience at my own university, and I can tell you that there is a real improvement because of the intentionality that Jennifer spoke about before. We are not just saying survival of the fittest anymore. We're saying how can we intentionally help you with that transition to make that transition successfully. Anybody else?
I mean, you're talking of your universities. Give us the examples that the universities has implemented to make sure that the transition for first years is really smooth.
Mm-hmm. Look, I will gladly do so, but I just want to say I need to be careful to just tread the line. I will. I just want to explain why I'm worried to do it, because I'm representing the National Resource Centre today. Okay, so I don't want to be promoting what UJ does in compared to other universities, because I think that would be detrimental.
Surely
Yes, I'm going to answer you. Just give me a second. I just did my preamble. That's all.
What
Okay.
I'm trying to say, surely universities, in a way, there will be programs that may be similar. You know what I mean? So you would not get into trouble for saying.
No, I wouldn't. Okay, let me just continue with the answer. I think that's going to be easier. So at my university, we phrase it as the first year experience, but it is not a module or a course. It is a program focused on the whole university and opening it up to students. So we are literally looking critically at every element of what first years experience when they come into the institution. Let me take an example of orientation. When I was a student, orientation was a place where information was dumped on you, and you got this thick booklet, and it was just information. And at my institution, for example, we've said we're going to limit that amount of information, include more experiences to help you become part of the university, and we're going to stretch that orientation out over the first semester or even the first year. So we're going to extend orientation into the first year. That's the one thing. Second thing is early warning systems is something that is big in South Africa at the moment. We're all struggling with that. How do we identify a student who is likely to drop out? Because they tend to leave without talking to us, okay? And that means we can't help them, because we at my university, for example, take 10,000 first-year students. So if a student is in academic trouble, we don't know it until it's often too late. So we are working very hard to get early warning systems in place. For example, what factors could tell us when a student arrives that they might struggle, so that we can start addressing that immediately. After about 3 weeks, we want to ask the question, are they actively involved in what we're doing? Are they attending lectures? Are they taking part in all the aspects that we want them to take part in? Then after the first assessment, we want to know how are they doing across all of their subjects. Not in the past, we used to know in one subject how they were doing, but we want to know more broadly what they're doing. So an early warning system like that is part of what we do. We take the residences and we really want to transform them into being centers of academic excellence, so that the student who enters in a residence has all the support that we could possibly provide for that student. Obviously other students too, but they are a specific group because they sit on our campuses. We're looking at the role of senior students. We believe that senior students are crucial in terms of being guides to help first-year students integrate and become part of the sector and get the support that they need. They are more likely to speak to a peer than to a lecturer. So those would be a few things. There are a lot more, but those would be some of the broad things.
If you don't mind, I might just offer a little bit of perspective from the U.S. because this is one of the times where the fact that we're 3 or decades down the road, we've, in the United States, been able to identify what we call high-impact practices that have depth and research to show that they are a good investment of institutional resources and also have an actual effect on the students that's positive and significant. And those include, there's a long list of them, but those include ones that might be integrated into the first year seminars, common intellectual experiences, service learning and community-based learning, learning communities, writing intensive experiences, experiential education, global and diversity learning opportunities. So these are the kinds of things that have shown that these are practices. The one challenge I would say, though, is that I think we're all searching for the magic combination of programs, and I think that upon identifying these programs that are high impact, we also have to caution ourselves that we're not just implementing programs, but we're implementing them with quality. And so there are reasons why these programs have been shown to be effective, that they're student-centered, they allow for interaction with other students, faculty, and staff, that there's accountability. So I think it's wonderful that we focus on what kinds of programs we can implement so that students will be successful, but I think we also have to hold ourselves accountable that we are implementing them with a degree of quality that they actually are reaching their fullest potential. So I just wanted to offer that perspective because this is an ongoing conversation in the United States about what exactly are the programs we can implement to facilitate first-year student matriculation and success. And that's really where we are at this point. And I imagine those are some issues that will be the research and practice that the National Resource Center in South Africa will be leading that conversation here.
Yes. And if I could just add to that, I think the question for us is, are those the same as the high impact practices we have in our country? So I think what we need to identify is what are the things that work for us, and they might be half the same and half different, but that's one of the things I think the National Resource Centre will definitely focus on, to identify those.
I have a follow-up question, sorry. For my listeners, you were speaking about life problems. I think what they need to learn is what are those life problems. For example, to say, are girls getting pregnant? Is the fact that they can't afford food because maybe NEFS doesn't cover that part. Like, my listeners need more details, not just they drop out and then what.
Yes, yes.
So for me, when you answer the question, can you give us certain examples of maybe there was when you studied the group, 14% was suffering from the fact that they've got no support from home.
Yes.
Something like that.
Right, sure. Let me start off by saying I'm going to once again speak about the South Africa, the UJ context, because that's where I've done that research. But at our institution, 2/3 of students, 67% of students, are first-generation university entrants. That means they're part of the first generation in their family to enter higher education. If you break that down a little bit further, then about 45 to 50% of them are the very first member of their family to come to higher education. Now, those are two stats that I'm very proud of, but that tells us something about the cultural capital the students arrive with. Now, please don't misunderstand that term. The cultural capital speaks to their prior educational and social experiences that prepares them for higher education. That's what I mean by that term. So those students arrive and they have no background of a university and what it means. I would encourage, for example, parents who have first-generation children to send their children to the mini open days of the different universities. Go and visit the campuses. Go and experience what it's like. Speak to people who have qualifications. Let's talk about the food issue. At my university, about 35%, we do a survey in week 6 to find out where students are by the 6th week of class. Okay? And by week 6, about 35% of them report having food problems. So we have a scheme at the moment where we provide between 2,500 and 3,000 hot meals twice a day for students. And we supply them with dehydrated meal packs for free. But food is a massive issue on my campus, and we're not even getting close to covering everybody, but that's what we're doing at the moment. If you think of something like study habits, when I ask students when they arrive at university, how many hours a week have you studied outside of school time in a normal week? More than half of them studied fewer than 10 hours a week outside of school time, and they still did well enough to get into higher education. When I asked them in week 6, how hard have you been working now? Most of them report between 10 and 15 hours of work outside of class time. When I tell my academic colleagues that, they want to fall on their backs because they just cannot believe that the students are doing so little work when it comes to academics. But it's a habit that they've had when they arrived, okay? So they're not ready for that. And I think the last thing I would say is, because I could make the list quite long, but I would rather then stop with the fourth one, if that's okay with you, because I think they become quite practical already, is the fact that we find that many students have this belief that academic success depends at least in part on luck. So they study for a test and they fail and they feel I was unlucky, you know, that didn't work. And they try and do exactly the same thing in the next test and they hope it's going to work. And they don't come and ask us for help. All universities in this country spend millions of rands on providing support services. But it's almost impossible for us to go and get the student from a class of 500 and identify them and get them to come and talk to us. You know, it's adult education in that sense. And we need them to be responsible enough to come and ask for the help. We can help most of them. I can honestly tell you that. But they need to come and ask for the help and not just hope things will go better. Okay, so I hope that helps for that. And if you want more, please contact me afterwards and we can have a much longer discussion about this. Okay. Anybody else with a question?
You sort of touched on that now when saying you can't go into a class of 500 students. When I went to varsity, and that's about 10 years ago, there were more students in my class than there was place to sit.
Yes.
And the reason was that, the reason was that don't worry, you'll have a place to sit by the middle of the year because there's, so it's sort of, you know, when you get there, there's that message already that half people believe. That's a very negative way to get into it, but in a way it's also a bit of a motivational
Yes,
thing.
it is.
So is that not the problem? Is the figures not the problem here? I mean, the parents pay hundreds of thousands of rand to have their kid in a class with 30 people or less, and then they come to university and there's 500 people or less, and you think, oh, you know, it doesn't matter. My lecturer would know my name until the middle of the second year. Isn't that a big problem? Well, aren't there too many people in universities? Do we not need more universities? This is now a long-term kind of thing, but isn't that the fundamental problem?
I would just disagree with you on one point, and that is that you want to make that the fundamental problem. I think Jennifer and Darren will tell you, we've been doing research in this stuff, and there is no magic bullet. There is no, if we just make the classes smaller, it's going to solve the problem. That doesn't happen. Will it contribute? Absolutely. I have no doubt in my mind that if we could have double the number of universities and make the classes half the size and spend more time with the students, that would have a positive effect. I have no doubt about that. And you know, as you probably well know, we've got 2 new universities that have been started over the past 2 years in South Africa. So 2 brand new universities. We are creating slightly more space. But university education is extremely expensive when it comes to a government perspective. Yes, the parents pay a lot, but government pay at least 2 rand for every rand that a parent pays, at least, if it's not 3, for every student in terms of subsidy, because higher education is just such an expensive endeavor. And as a nation, you know, with the other social problems we have, I can't foresee that we could prioritize that enough to be able to do that as a solution. But if you go to countries where classes are that small, universities, you will still find a dropout rate there. So it will improve it, but it won't solve it.
In some senses, what you're saying goes back to what Andre was saying about academic Darwinism. I mean, there's an inherent belief there, right, that, well, there'll be room because people will be gone. This institutionalized belief and almost acceptance of the departure rate being what it is, and the idea that, well, if the student isn't successful. I think what this whole movement about the first year experience in student success is really changing that notion, and that it's a mutual relationship between the student giving their best and bringing, you know, their expectations, skill sets, talents, motivation forward, and the institution creating an environment, yes, with some structural limitations, obviously, of size and scope, but to create as many possible points of leverage and an opportunity for that student to be successful in that environment. So there's this kind of mutuality there that this is really trying to debunk the whole academic Darwinism. You know, to look to your left, look to your right. One or two of you won't be here, so don't worry about the seat because this will take care of itself. So I think that there's these movements around student success and the first year experience that now, as we said, are bubbling up to an international level, are really hopeful in reframing the idea of student success as being this mutual commitment from between student and institution.
I also want to touch on this idea that that's somehow motivating. You know, I think what that does is motivates people to survive, right? But what we're hoping to do is create systems in which people will thrive and will set them up for success long term, not demotivate the people who somehow, you know, like Andre said, maybe it's because of luck, maybe it's because they don't have the cultural capital to navigate all of this, that somehow they will be in a better position to engage as a productive citizen long term.
Absolutely. Anything else? And thank you very much. We appreciate it. You'll hear a lot more about the National Resource Centre as time goes by, I hope.
The University of Johannesburg. Rethink, reinvent.